Welcome back to the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. This week, we have Jennie Wood on the podcast to talk about their graphic novel over at Maverick, an imprint over at Mad Cave called Paper Planes. Jennie did this book along with Doza Draw's Micah Myers for the Maverick imprint. It's a young adult graphic novel called Paper Planes. Check it out. You can visit online, jenniewood.com, to see more information about it. We've written a review on the website too, capesandtights.com. But this episode is Jennie Wood talking about their original graphic novel, Mad Cave Studios and Maverick's Paper Planes. Enjoy the episode, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. It's I live in Maine, and in Maine right now we've had rain for 22 of the past 28 days.
Wow.
It's very unusual. I feel like I'm in Seattle or England or something like that, but I'm making do. Luckily, my office has no windows, so I don't know if it's raining or not.
Well, I'm not far away. I'm in Boston. So we've gotten a lot of rain here too. Not quite as much as I love Maine. So wow, I'm jealous. Even with all the rain, I'm jealous that you're in Maine.
That's a great connection. I lived in Lowell and Haverhill, Andover for about 10 years, from 2006 to 2016. So I know the Boston, greater Boston area pretty well. I was born in Newburyport, so Massachusetts is common to me, but I like Maine a lot more. Every time I go back to Massachusetts, I'm like, just too many people.
Right. And all those places that you name, like Newburyport's beautiful, and I love the whole Haverhill area. So yeah, but Maine is better. I agree with you.
There's just too many people. It's weird to say, and that's first world problems, I believe. But like when you go there and you just like there's traffic all the time. When I tell someone in Maine that I'm going to be there in 15 minutes, it takes me 15 minutes to get there. In Massachusetts, if you leave 2 minutes late, you could be 20 minutes late. If you leave 2 minutes early, you could be 15 minutes early. It's the weirdest thing. And I'm glad I ended up moving back to Maine because I lived here most of my life, but I enjoy it. Weather aside, yes, it is nice to be here in Maine. But we're not here to talk about the weather or where we are, because anybody like who listens to this podcast who lives in like California, and we're talking about places in Massachusetts and in Maine, they're going to be like, what the heck are you guys talking about? But let's get started. I mean, it's the first time. Hopefully, you'll return at some point in the future. First time on the podcast. So let's tell a little bit about how your origin story in comic books, graphic novels, and things like that. Like how you started collecting or reading, and then how you got into the industry in the first place.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. My way into comics as a kid. So I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. There wasn't, the closest comic book store was in Charlotte, North Carolina, so about an hour away. And I was really into, as a kid, cartoons, because that was more accessible through the TV, my TV. I had a TV in my room, and my older cousins got me into Star Blazers, which for people who've never heard of that, why would you, right? It was like an 80s syndicated thing. And I was a little kid, and I was really into it. It's a Japanese animation. It's English dubbed, and there was this group of people called the Star Force, and they had to leave Earth and go across the universe. They had 1 year, I think it was 1 year, to get cosmic DNA to save the Earth from radiation. So even as a kid, it had to be dark or deep for me to get into it. And then so I became obsessed with that show, and I was in Charlotte. I walked into that comic book store as a kid and saw a comic book version of Star Blazers. And I was like, what is this? And I opened it, I was like, what are comics? And that led me to more comics, which led me to the superheroes. And in particular, the Hulk was great for me because my parents would argue. And they would argue a lot. And I realized that if I became the Hulk and was louder than them and angrier than them, and I'm a kid, that was my superpower. I could get them to stop. And Hulk helped me. Like, I don't know if how I would have navigated that without the Hulk. So, those origins have made me love comics since I was a kid, and got out of it, as a lot of people do, fell out of it a little bit in college, found my way back to it through graphic novels, especially, Why the Last Man, Blankets, Fun Home. These are all three very different graphic novels, but I was reading them around the same time. And I was like rediscovering comics, graphic novels. I'm like, I was working on this story called Flutter. And it was about a boy. It was about a girl who shapeshifts into a boy to get his dream girl because his dream girl was straight. And I was writing it as prose, and it just felt like it needed to be more than that. And particularly Why the Last Man. So I'm reading this, and it's a huge epic story. I still get chills when I think about it. And I'm like, I want to do this with Flutter. Like, I want to turn Flutter into a graphic novel. Took a course here in Boston at Grub Street called, graphic novel writing or writing comics, something of that nature. And so learned how to write comics. And that was the birth of Flutter.
Which is a very popular book and very well done. So that's a good start there.
Thank you. And that is a long answer, but it took you from childhood to recent years.
That's not the longest answer we've got here on the podcast, so don't worry about that. I feel like I've asked that question before. I've looked, I'm like, wow, we're 25 minutes in. This person still hasn't stopped talking about their origin story.
Yeah, I've listened to some of your podcasts, and range is great. So I aim to be in the middle of in terms of length.
But yeah, and so graphic novel versus floppy. Before we get into paper planes specifically, but like graphic novels versus like releasing monthly, is there a preference for you? Or is it just how the stories have been created in your mind?
I think I tend to think long range, and because I also write young adult novels, prose, and so that tends to be how my brain works. I actually find it really harder to write short stories. So when I do, like, I do a lot of shorts for anthologies, those are actually harder. But yeah, my brain just works in terms of longer books. So I think that's why I have no, I love the floppies, but as a writer, I just don't tend to think in that way.
And I think there's up and ebbs and flows in how people collect. I'm a huge single issue, Wednesday Warrior, so on and so forth. But I used to like shy away from anything in graphic novel or trade paperback form because I was like, but I want issue number 1. Like, I want that thing. And then more recently, I don't know if it's as I grew older or just the market changed a little bit, where there's definitely some graphic novels that were never released in floppy that I'm now starting to pick up and read and enjoy, and so on and so forth. I don't know if I read a lot of it digitally, so maybe it doesn't matter anymore whether or not it's a complete story that's 5 issues in digital form, or it's a single issue. I don't know, but I definitely think that my mind has changed into accepting more graphic novels, and there's so many good ones out there that I might have missed if I wish I'd stuck to floppy to comic books.
Right. But I get it. I get why people want to collect the floppies, and there have been times where I've done that too. And I get why people, have stayed away from graphic novels or find that term pretentious. There's also, people in the literary world who don't give graphic novels their due, don't give it the respect, so I get all sides of it. Definitely. We all have our preferences, and it's just great to have all these options.
Exactly. And so you release paper plane or releasing paper planes. I read it so long ago now that I feel like it's already been released, but you're releasing paper planes on the Maverick imprint over at Mad Cave. How did that end up at Mad Cave and the Maverick imprint? Did they approach you? Did you approach them? How did that happen?
They approached me. Erica Schultz, who is a great writer in her own right. She writes for Marvel currently, and Image. She and I are longtime friends, and she does some editing for Mad Cave for Maverick. And they had this idea for a graphic novel about a grade school friendship that was really intense. And they were going to be sent to a camp for troubled youth, and while there, they were going to communicate to each other via paper planes because they wouldn't have access to their phones. That was what they had. And Erica just thought of me and thought it would be a great fit. She did not know at the time that I had just had a grade school friend recently pass away. This was in 2020 going into 2021. And I had fallen down that rabbit hole of how grade school friends, whether you stay in touch with them or not,
Mhm.
they just leave their mark on you. And I had rewatched Stand By Me, and I had reread The Body, and I was just in the rabbit hole. And I get this small pitch from Erica, and like, would you be interested in this? And I'm like, yes, I would love to write about this right now because I'm kind of in it. So it was just one of those moments where a bunch of dots connect together. It just felt meant to be.
That's awesome. And I've said it multiple times on the podcast and so on. Mad Cave and Maverick and the whole team over there is just outstanding right now. They're doing wonderful things. I'm excited to see how far they can go with what they're doing over there. And the fact that this is at Maverick and at Mad Cave is such a great thing in my opinion, because they're just killing it, honestly.
They're great. It's a great
Yes.
group of people. They're so supportive. They're all about finding diverse stories in all different kinds of ways, different creators, giving people a shot who normally would have, to go through other channels or have to wait a few years. They're just a great supportive team of people.
Absolutely. And their marketing team's great. I mentioned it before too. I've gotten things. I just put Liana Kangas is the artist of a new book, Mariko Between Worlds, that's coming out over at Mad Cave. And they just sent me a package in the mail with like a poster and some pins I put on my backpack and so on and so forth. So it's really have a great marketing behind things too. And I don't know if I'll get something with a Paper Planes poster on it in the near future, because it is coming out soon. But hopefully I do, because I'd like to put that poster up if there was one. We gotta find room for it though, right?
If there's a poster, we will send you one. Last weekend we were in Chicago at the American Library Association conference. We're making buttons, and we made a welcome to Camp Hell button for Paper Plane. So we can maybe get you one of those.
That's amazing. That's so much fun. And it must have been fun. I mean, like I said, before we actually dive into the actual book, it must be fun doing things like this and promoting this book.
Yes. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, especially because I wasn't out promoting things, all of it, for 2020, 2021. Yeah. So it's just nice to be out there, to be promoting something that you feel so good about, because every aspect of working on this book was just, I keep saying it, but it was just a gift. It was a great experience.
How long did it take you to actually write the book?
It took me about a year to script it. Just from beginning outline to final scripts. And then Dozer Draws is the fabulous artist on this book, and it took them about a year to do the art. So it was a 2-year process, which I think is, from my experience with graphic novels, that's about my schedule as well on previous books.
It sounds about right. It sounds about right. And that's one of those things that I don't know if I'm a instant gratification kind of thing. And if I were to create comic books, why I would kind of want the single issue thing is because I could do it and release it as it goes. This whole waiting a year and a half, 2 years potentially to release the product that I made work so hard on probably would eat at me personally. Right. But I can understand how it does take time to make these things. Yeah.
Well, and that's exactly why, even though I prefer longer scripts, I do short stories for anthologies, so that I can exercise those muscles right in between the longer graphic novels.
Absolutely. And you gave a kind of an idea of what Mad Cave approached you with the story, but what's your elevator pitch to someone when you're talking to them, like at the association thing this weekend? How did you pitch it to someone?
That it's 2 grade school friends who've been friends for a long time. They get sent to a camp for troubled youth during the summer for an incident that they were involved in, and they have to spend the summer kind of reconciling with what got them there and who they are and the future of their friendship. And that they communicate, via paper planes, which are very,
Yes. I wanted to reiterate that again. The Paper Planes thing is such a unique thing as well. It's also one of those things I think about, like where my son even recognizes when I'm on my phone too much. He's 2. And to the point where he's like, Daddy, put it down. Daddy, put it down. I'm like, oh, geez, gosh. That we also can't, it feels like the whole texting thing is like, well, we can't use our phones. We've got to text somehow. So we're going to use paper planes.
Right. And we tried to be careful with the book, not to use it too much, to find that right balance, right?
Yes. But, and so Mad Cave, I'm guessing, connected you with Dozer Draws too. That wasn't something that you did, right? That was probably someone they approached you with.
Yeah, they assembled a great team for this book. I think that I think it shows in the book. I think each person involved, from Erica editing, Dozer doing their amazing art, which makes, I mean, they just got the story right away and made these characters so accessible. And then Micah Myers, lettering extraordinaire. So
Yes.
yeah, it was a great team.
The characters are so engaging, they're likable, they're easy to relate to also as human beings, that we all have, you know, stories to deal with and problems to deal with. It makes it easier for us as readers to read when you can connect with them on an emotional level. And that's, I think that's something that really came across in Paper Planes. Was that part of this whole plan in this book, was to be able to have people connect with them?
Yes, absolutely. I spend a lot of time developing characters. So I have this, like, bio sheet that I fill out where it goes into, what's the character's favorite shirt and why, favorite food, what items are in their fridge. Just, it gets to be really specific things that probably won't show up on the page, but what I like to do there is create a full character and a flawed character. It's very important that the characters have flaws, because no one's going to relate to a character that doesn't, right? And even if, a queer character needs to have flaws, you need to make them relatable. And so, yeah, that's really number one, because the plot, the story, everything comes out of those characters. So
I'm glad you brought up the queer character needing flaws, because the fact that I've had conversations with people on here, I think it might have been with Jude, Ellison S. Doyle, about the idea that people just associate the fact that queer people are perfect in this weird way, and that they have to make it so they have flaws, and to prove that they're normal people. Like, it's just like everybody has flaws, everybody has problems, and the fact that there's this weird misconception that you have to be perfect, relationships have to be perfect, things have to be perfect, and I'm glad you brought that up.
yeah, I mean, to be relatable, to show people who are, uncomfortable or don't understand or just don't have a lot of queer people in their lives, you show that we're just like everyone else. You
Yes.
have to show the layers, the flaws. um and yeah, that has to be there. And what helps is that we have a lot more queer representation,
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot more room for nuance and all the flaws.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a book club at my local comic book shop, that we read a trade paperback or a graphic novel every month. And this past month, we did our first young adult, and we read Wind. And it was a very good book to read for Pride Month in that sense, too. It opened up a lot of people's eyes to some things, and it was just well written. And James Tunyon does a great job with that. I feel like this is another great book that I think that I mentioned before we started recording, about the idea that young adult books don't have to be specifically towards young adults. They're for everybody, but they're geared towards young adults, meaning that young adults can read them. Was that the plan going into this? Is to make it so it's accessible to everybody, but really focuses on young adults?
We didn't talk about it, but
Okay.
I mean, I think that's how I approach everything. I think that's a through line in all of my young adult work, is to try and make it accessible for everyone. So because we were all that age at one point, right? So, I remember when I was working on Flutter, I'm like, most people don't shapeshift or can't. I mean, we can't shapeshift into a boy or another gender to pursue the person that we want. But in grade school, we probably tried out for a musical or tried out for soccer or something to get someone's attention,
Mhm.
right? And so I felt like that, for that series, was people's way in. And with Paper Planes, I think we've all been there, where we've had a friendship where we're suddenly struggling to communicate. We're struggling to communicate who we are with the world. We're
Mhm.
struggling to find words. That's usually a big part of middle school going into high school. So
Mhm.
I did think, people or hope that people could find that relatable, right? So it's
Mhm.
not something we talk, it's kind of like this unconscious thing, right? Like, where it was there through the whole process, although we didn't openly talk about it.
Mhm. With this book club too, which is really cool, and this is one of the ones I'm going to recommend we read once it releases, is that there's a father and son that come to the book club, and the son's like 13 years old. Obviously, the father is around my age, around 37, 40 years old, And the idea is that they both read it. And so if you read a book that was specifically adult oriented, obviously the kid wouldn't connect with it in a way, or maybe they shouldn't read it. Honestly, there's some books out there that the kid probably shouldn't be opening yet, as well as the opposite that you know, if it was a book geared towards someone who's 10, 12, 13 years old, it might not connect as well. And there's books out there that I think that you can do this. And like you mentioned, we all lived through young adult life. We always had that. The opposite of the child hasn't lived through adult life yet, and that's the difference. I think some of the things have in that. And I just, like I said, I as I mentioned prior, with the whole like floppy versus trade or graphic novel. As I got older, I realized that I could read everything. I have Star Wars books that from the New High Republic series that are like picture books that I'm like, I'm still gonna read this. I'm not too old for this. I collect comic book things. I'm never too old for this stuff.
Right. Never. You're never too old.
So I just love that idea of having a book that is accessible for young adults and young people, that's also accessible for someone as an adult like myself. And something like Paper Planes really connected that way. And I don't know why I keep on going back to that, but I don't know. I had that feeling that I really enjoyed the book, and trying to quantify why I really like trying to give you an excuse of why I liked it. I'm like, oh, it's for everybody. I swear it's for everybody, people.
No, I mean, I definitely had that in mind. So
Yeah.
you're not, and then I'm an adult writing it from an adult perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that might be part of it too. Right. But it's that, and when I was writing it, I was thinking about friendships, people who have grown apart from, not just the grade school friend that passed away or other grade school friends, but adult friendships.
Mm-hmm.
Like things happen in our adulthood that separate us from our friendships or cause a strain or turbulence. So I think we can still relate to it as adults, not just look back on who we were in grade school.
And going back on the grade school, but we all passed notes as young kids too. Like that's the way we communicated, because there's no way. I mean, how many times did I date someone in grade school that I never actually ever talked to in person, like never actually even communicated actual words to, and to have the ability to pass notes, and passing notes in a paper airplane kind of way kind of reminded me of those days in school where you'd pass notes across tables or whatever. And seeing that. What did I just recently? Oh, Power Rangers. I just watched the 2017 Power Rangers movie for the first time, like the reboot of it, whatever. And at the end of the movie, I'm not going to spoil much to it, but they have the Power Rangers powers, and they're passing notes in classes, but they're able to do it by throwing it so fast because of their powers, that it's just like they're throwing it across the room and the person's just catching it. And I was like, I literally was like, oh, it's like on Paper Planes where they're throwing planes across the room. I was like, it's weird how I'm connecting Paper Planes to Power Rangers, but we all have done that. We've all passed notes in class, and this is a similar thing where they're passing notes in their cabins at this camp, but it's very similar in that sense.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I love the comparison to Power Rangers and Paper Planes. I love it.
I was mad about the Power Rangers thing, because I'm like, I just wanted the old school, like simple two-tone motorcycle helmet style Power Rangers suits, and it was too futuristic for me in that sense. But I'll always love my Power Rangers out there. I mean, was there anything else in Paper Planes going into it that you really wanted to accomplish, that you did and you really want people to know about?
Well, one important aspect, thank you. That's a great question. And as soon as you said it, I'm like, oh yeah, there's the whole non-binary aspect of it. So now that I'm more on the other side of it, sometimes I forget. So I came out as non-binary during the pandemic, right around the time I got the opportunity to write this book. And it was one of those things. So I didn't even know, like 10 years ago, I hadn't heard the term cisgender. I hadn't heard the terms non-binary. And I was working on Flutter. I was starting to work on Flutter. And then I wrote A Boy Like Me, which is a young adult novel about a trans boy assigned the wrong gender at birth, who is in high school, and there's a girl who loves him and sees him for who he is. But both of those projects, A Boy Like Me and Flutter, were totally written in the binary. And both of those projects took me to comic conventions, including FlameCon in New York and Queers in Comics, which was also in New York. And it was at those conventions where I was asked for the first time by moderators on panels what my pronouns were. And the first time I was ever asked, and this was years ago at this point, but I was like, inside my head, in person, I was very polite. I was like, she,
Mhm.
her, hers, stumbling through it. But in my head, I was like, why are you asking me? Don't I look female? Blah, blah, blah. And that reaction, I was out, I'd been out for years as a lesbian, didn't feel right, but it felt like it's like the best fit I could find.
Yes.
I had such a reaction though to my own pronouns that I'm like, internally, that I'm like, something's going on here. And through, being there and exhibiting all these conventions and exhibiting Flutter and A Boy Like Me, I started to learn the terms non-binary and cisgender and be introduced to these. And then the next step was I would talk to my friends who were, in at comic conventions, who are like in their late teens, early 20s. Because at conventions, one of the things I love is you meet a wide range of people of different ages, different backgrounds. And I would be telling my younger friends, I'm like, if I were 18, I'd be non-binary. This was like 2-3 years after being introduced to these terms. And then we get into a pandemic, the world stops, and I'm like, you know what? Who cares, that I'm not 18? I'm non-binary. I'm
Mhm.
going to get used to these pronouns. Around the same time, I got the opportunity to write Paper Planes. Maverick and Mav Cave are so open to representation, to, all different kind of LGBTQ characters, and writing those and creating those. So I'm like, I'm going to have the main character be non-binary. And it was an amazing opportunity to do something that I'll never get to do, which is be non-binary in grade school, have people see them and be completely fine with it. Because my friends who have kids who are that age, they are better at pronouns than us adults. Like
Oh,
they
100%.
right. So this book was a great opportunity for me to explore what it would be to be non-binary at a younger age, to write my first non-binary character while coming out as non-binary. And that, again, is another gift. It was just such a great opportunity, and then finishing the book and doing podcasts and interviews. And, here I am, being seen, what I feel like for the first time, as my genuine, authentic self, although I didn't know what that was a few years back.
Yes.
And to work with Dozer, who is a non-binary artist, and see the world that we created through this book through their eyes has just been amazing.
It's great, and I love representation is still not where it should be. But it's on its way there, in my opinion. And I think the comic book industry is such a great place for that to be, shown. Like, just because I feel like all of us as the comic book industry have dealt with being, I hate to compare, but closeted to the point where we're geeks, nerds, all these things that we didn't want people to know about. And in the sense that, like, we've dealt with that since the day we started, reading Batman, Superman, Wolverine, all these things. Like, I don't want people knowing how much of a nerd I am. I hid that. You mentioned the whole transformation or morphing from, male to female to get the person you like you mentioned about Flutter, is I did that in a sense of hiding who I was. I was like trying to be the biggest, popular person in the world, even though in the closet I was going home and reading Wolverine and wanting to play with action figures and things like that. But I didn't want my friends at school to know that I wanted to basketball, football, baseball, all that stuff is what I wanted them to know, rock music and all that stuff. But I really wanted to go home and just read comic books. And so we've all dealt with that our entire lives. So now that it makes it feel like it's easier. I hate to say easier because I don't know, as a straight white male in the United States, my life is pretty easy. But it's easier in comic books, I think, for some people to come out and say, I'm going to write about non-binary character, because a lot of us are open to the idea of different things. It's a lot to say this. It's a lot to stumble on to try to get that point out, but
it's important. It's an important point. It's absolutely true. I mean, I just mapped you through like the last decade of my experience in comics. I found my home. I found my identity because of comics and comic conventions and the community, and to be able then to write a non-binary character in a comic, in a graphic novel, is just fantastic. But yes, the comics, the industry is so open to writing about all of these issues, all different kinds of characters, and And what's great about it is that there is something for everyone, right? There's more publishers now, more and more popping up, which are more and more opportunities to write these kinds of stories.
And I think one of the problems, misconceptions of people who are not as open-minded or haven't gotten introduced to a lot of these things is that you writing a character that's non-binary is not this book, excuse me, it's not about a character who's non-binary. It has a character in it who's non-binary. It's the same thing. This week as we record this, Christopher Chaos comes out, The Oddly Pedestrian Life of Christopher Chaos by Tinian and Tate Bromble, Isaac Goodhart. The character is gay and queer in the book, but that's not about the character being queer. Wind is not about the character being queer. Right. It's that a character is, and that's it. What's like, right. So if you're, it's not like you're getting preached to about, whatever it may be. It's a character in a book that is like a normal person in this world that you live in. You go to the grocery store, there's non-binary people at the grocery store, but that's not about, the grocery store isn't about going to a non-binary person who's checking you out at the register. Right. It's part of life. And that's what's great about these books and what you wrote here with Paper Planes.
Well, what's great about all these characters is, and you said it, is that these being queer, being non-binary, being gay, it's not the most interesting thing about these characters.
Yes.
It's like they're Pisces and they're registered independent to vote, and they're also non-binary or gay, so, which is great. We've got so many characters now that it's just one of a list of things that they are. And again, that's partially due or largely due to how much representation there is in comics. So we can write these characters, and it's not a coming out story. It's not a story that focuses on their gender identity. It just is one of many aspects.
And that's not to say books that are about that are bad. I'm just saying that like it's one of those things that I just love that representation to the point where you're just reading a comic book that happens to have a queer character in it, or a non-binary character or a trans character. Like it just happens to be that way. And most good stories that are written that way, you can just continue on. It's not like a stumbling block on the reading of the book. It's just like, okay, yep, this is it. I have multiple friends who are non-binary. They live in my life, so why wouldn't my comic book characters also have that in it? And I think that's the great thing about comic books right now. And as we progress and go forward in the industry, it also helps with independent comic books nowadays of being in such a big thing. And Maverick is an independent publisher to the point where like you created this with the team over there at Mad Cave and Maverick from the ground up. This is not a character. You're not trying to rewrite Superman. You're not trying to rewrite Supergirl. This is, your characters are your characters that didn't exist prior to the inception of this novel, the graphic novel. And so that's what's cool too. And not saying that there's not a transformation in big two superhero comic books, because there is. You see this now with some characters coming out and things like that. It's just a lot easier to do a character that's from the ground up in independent comic books. And that's what I love about the growth of independent comic books has allowed this to happen as well.
Yeah, there's not the pressure, there's not the expectations from longtime fans. And yeah, which is one reason I prefer to create original characters. And I get those, I understand those expectations. I have them too for my favorite things. So yeah, that's a major difference.
I mean, the world freaked out when Marvel decided to make Thor female, and that was a simple thing, let alone, diving into other stuff in the world. It's just kind of funny how like people have this preconceived notion of what their characters they grew up with are. And it's possible that, Captain America his entire life has dealt with this, thought in his head that he wants to be who he actually wants to be. But people don't want to hear that. They want to hear that Captain America is a straight, role, like model of a character, all this stuff. They don't want it to be changed. And like I said, independent comics, when you create a character from the beginning, you can make it whatever you want. You can make a character with no arm and say, oh, you're just born with no arm. Or you can go as further as making people like they are today in the world you live in.
Right. And those comics are there for people who want them. And if the people who don't want them and want their superhero comics, it's again, it just goes back to having all these great options on the shelves.
Absolutely. And so we mentioned Dozer. I wanted to create the Dozer Draws thing too, is like there's certain artists that work so well with someone's writing. And I think Dozer Draws is a perfect connection on this. Like their ability to get a visual aspect of what you were writing is so amazing. And then Micah Myers' lettering is perfect too in this thing. Micah's amazing as well for any book that they letter. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. But the connection on, I think that's one of those things that I've read stories, and I hate to do this, but I love James Tynion the Fourth's writing. I think his writing is absolutely wonderful. Me and my buddy Paul, who owns the local comic book shop, Galactic Comics in my area, have struggled to get through the first 2 issues of the Department of Truth because Martin Simons' art is so different. It's amazing. It's talented, way better than I can ever do it. And I'm even an artist. Is that it's just something that I haven't got to stumbling. I'm stumbling over that. And sometimes that artwork just works pairs so well with you. And having the ability to have Dozer draw your script and your graphic novel is the perfect matchup, in my opinion.
I agree. They got the story from day one, the characters, and was able to capture what I had in mind, and in a lot of cases even better. So I won the lottery, the artist lottery in this book, because I agree with you. Like sometimes the writing and the art doesn't match, and the writing can be fantastic and the art can be fantastic, but if they don't complement each other, then it doesn't quite soar off the page,
because it takes you away from what you're actually doing. Like you're supposed to almost, in my opinion, when you go to read a book, you're supposed to just read the book and look at the visuals and keep it going. If it stands out too much one way or the other, it distracts you from what you're actually looking at when you're trying to get across. So the idea that a young adult, I hate to say simple, but the Dozer Draw's work is so simple, but it needs to be in that point. I don't think it needs to be super detailed and all that stuff. The lines are crisp. And I love the difference between, I wrote a note, I didn't write it on my notes here, but the difference between the past and the present too. Yes, in the coloring of it, that was amazing. And the lines are a little bit more fuzzy and things like that. That's such a great difference between past and present.
That was Dozer's. That's all their idea, working hand in hand with our editor, with Erica, kind of just giving them feedback. But yeah, that was all Dozer, working to make, they wanted the reader to go back and forth from the flashbacks to present without having to think too much, right? As you were saying, just to keep reading, and you're not distracted by anything.
And I feel like I read at night in bed a lot of times. I read on my iPad. My wife goes to sleep, so I have this iPad mount that mounts up. It's backlit, so the lights can be off and it's not bothering her as much. And I feel like sometimes as I get into reading and getting more tired, obviously, and so on and so forth, that I miss things on the page. And sometimes you miss that thing at the top of the page that says 5 years ago. And the artwork being different but also similar allows you to go, after you read that first segment of a flashback, then every time the pages look like this that you're not in the actual present, which doesn't confuse you. And I think that's a big thing. And some people do it and some people don't. Dozer Draws nailed it on this one.
Yes. Yeah. All of their instincts for that were spot on. Yeah.
And so, the book's about to come out. You're in that final stretch. Obviously, I'm guessing you've been busy talking to people and promoting it. You mentioned you were just at a conference this past weekend promoting it. You're in that home stretch. You're excited to get it out there. What's the next? Is it just basically promoting that book right now? Or are you working on something else at the time? I understand you might not be able to talk about it, but are you working on some other stuff right now?
Oh my God, I hate that. I hate the you can't talk about it stuff, but
I've said before, like if you tell me something that you can talk about and there's nothing you can't talk about, means you're not busy enough, or that like there's something that you need to have some work. Because if you have something you can't talk about, means you're busy and you're actually working on something.
Right. Well, yeah, I am working on a new graphic novel that I can't talk about. But I've got a comic short coming out in the next John Carpenter's Tales of a Halloween Night.
Oh, nice.
Horror anthology, which is not young adult. That comes out in September. And then I'm also working on another young adult prose, a novel. So separate from comics. And that one I'm actually wrapping up. And then I'll send it back to my literary agent after I've addressed all of his notes. So I am fortunate that I get to, while I'm working on a graphic novel and the artist is spending a year, that I've got other projects that I'm working on as well. But the next comic release, so Paper Planes comes out July 18th. And then the next comic release for me will be the John Carpenter's Tales from a Halloween Night in September.
That's awesome. I'm so looking forward to that too. Yes, and it's 18th at bookstores, and LCSs get it a day later just because of the way that it works in the world. They'll get it on the 19th because Tuesday's new book release and Wednesday's new comic book day. Just a weird way the world works. I like how they're back to back like that. There has been comics where it's like August 18th and you're not getting it in comic book stores until August 31st. I'm like, why is it so far away from each other? But you live locally enough. We got to get you up to Little Briar Patch up here in Bangor, Maine. Their local bookstore in the downtown Bangor area that sells, novels as well as graphic novels and things like that. And they would love to have you up here. So if it's around sometime with this book or maybe your next, next young adult novel, we got to get you up here so you can meet your fans up here in this area too. That'd be great.
I would love to.
Yes, absolutely. So Paper Planes, it's excellent. It's wonderful. Everybody should read it. Not just young adults, young adults. Honestly, it's a great book. I'm so glad that you worked with Maverick on this and got it out there. July 18th is it hits bookstores, so check that out, as well as you can get it online. Maverick and Mad Cave have partnered also with Omnibus, who just that's an episode that released the week that we were recording this, and they have a digital platform, digital online comic book store, so you can get it digitally on most places like that too. So check it out. Mad Cave has it for sale on their website as well, I'm sure. So get it, buy it, tell your friends to buy it for a friend, right?
Yes.
Buy 6 copies. Buy one for your car, one for your camp, one for your house. There's no discount on multiple copies, just letting you know. It's just I love it. I absolutely do. And that's not even joking. That's me being sarcastic. I was very happy. And I luckily Melissa over at Don't Hide PR has helped us book a number of guests on this podcast. Melissa's absolutely wonderful, very helpful. And I gave Melissa a list of people, and I'm like, I got to get you on here to talk because I really enjoyed your work. Sadly, I hadn't heard about you until this, which is none of, it's I hate admitting that stuff, but now it makes me want to go back and read things like Flutter, which is amazing. And I think that's what I love about doing this nowadays. I get to talk to and meet new people. And the number of times I've actually gone back and read older work from them that I had never heard about, because there's so much out there that makes me go, okay, I'm going to put whatever I was going to read off to the side and read things like Flutter. And so that's on my list to read now. So looking forward to that. So at some point in the future, we'll get you back on just to talk about Flutter. How about that?
That's great. And when I'm at comic conventions, I meet people all the time that it's my first time hearing of them, and I should have heard of them years ago, because there's so many people doing great work.
Absolutely. So check it out. And you have a website?
Yes, it's jenniewood.com.
Okay. And then I'm guessing you're on social. It's Jennie Wood and what was it? Wood and did
it? Jennie Wood and did.
Yes, that's what it was. I love the cleverness to those things out there. There's a lot of good ones out there. But check you out on social media. Visit your website, jenniewood.com, and go buy Paper Planes July 19th or 18th at bookstores, July 19th at local comic book shops. If you final quarter cutoff in most of these places has passed, but just tell your local comic book shop you want it, because even if they didn't get it or didn't know about it or whatever, they'll get it. It's not like they can't get it. So just let them know you want it, and they'll get it for you for sure, or check it out online. Like I said, I hate to promote big places, but buy it wherever you can buy it. Like the thing is, it's one of those things you're like, I don't want to support these big, big shops, Walmart, Target, whatever. I'm like, if they have it, buy it, because it still supports the creator of the book and the publisher and so on and so forth. The more people that buy Paper Planes, the more Mad Cave and Maverick will believe in Jennie, and that will make they'll hire them again to do things in the future. Correct?
Well, no, that's 110% correct. And if people at Target and Walmart seeing books leaving the shelves, it's like, what is that? So, yeah.
So wherever you can get it, not saying they're available everywhere, those places, but wherever you can get it, buy it, because that helps the creators of the book and so on. So Jennie, I'm so appreciative of you coming in, taking time off of your day to come in here and talk to us about Paper Planes and so much more. We'll hope to have you back on in the future. But until then, I hope everybody in the world buys it. It's a smash success. They're going to sell out and go into reprinting at some point. We really love the book. So thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you so much, Justin, for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
And have a good day and enjoy New England weather, right?
Right. Yes.